Thank you to the Secretary of State, and I appreciate his answer to several others' questions about the learning that he's done, because 10 days ago I asked him about information. For the people of Hinckley and Bosworth who live in Leicestershire, they want to know where the boundary is and what the implication is of any changes. Would he be kind enough to point out exactly where that boundary is, and for the people who are now out of lockdown, what that means in the measures they are taking, so there is a clear message that they can take home tonight?
Very happy to give that answer, which is very clear. For those who are in the City of Leicester and in Oadby and Wigston, then the measures that are set out, releasing on the 24th of July the closure of non-essential retail, releasing the closure of schools and childcare facilities, but keeping all of the other measures in place, that is the position. For those who are not in those two specific areas, they return to the same measures that the rest of the country is living with, except, of course, that we'll keep the higher vigilance, the higher testing and the communications in those areas. And the decisions on this geography was taken on the advice of local council leaders. I've seen, whilst I've been on my feet, that the Mayor of Leicester has made some comments around this. I did ask him if he wanted to put forward a different geography within the City of Leicester, and he declined to do so. But we work very hard, as closely as we can, with Leicester, and especially with the public health officials in Leicester, who are doing an absolutely valiant job in difficult circumstances.
Wes Streeting.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On lessons learned, given the circumstances in Leicester, does the Secretary of State for Health agree that the government made a terrible mistake in cutting the Health and Safety Executive's budget by 48% and by instructing the HSE to reduce inspections in the textiles industry by a third?
I haven't seen those figures, but what I do know is that local councils have an incredibly important responsibilities in this space, and we will now act. We will now act to make sure that we tackle some of the challenges that we find, especially in Leicester.
Jane Hunt.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the targeted new approach to business closures in the local lockdown area. However, the current lockdown has affected businesses both within the lockdown and outside the area, because people have decided not to open for fear of an unmanageable number of people coming to their establishment. Can the Secretary of State look to offer additional support for these businesses?
Well, the support that's available nationally to businesses, which is incredibly generous, is of course available to those outside the areas in question. I do understand the impact on businesses, both of course within Leicester, but also more broadly. And all I can say is that national support is available to all.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Over the last few weeks, I've exposed the significant risks of COVID-19 in some of York care homes. These findings have wider application. Measures in the Coronavirus Act, poor decision-making and poor governance have undoubtedly led to increases in infection and mortality. And there are serious questions over the recording and reporting of deaths. Will he or one of his ministers urgently meet with me before the recess to discuss these tragic findings so lessons can be learnt and lives saved?
Very happy to ensure that the Social Care Minister meets the Honourable Lady as soon as possible.
Greg Clark.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State is assiduous and energetic in making himself available to answer questions at all times, and I'm grateful that he's agreed to come before my committee next week so that we have longer than we would have had today given this statement. In March, we didn't have the testing capacity in place to cope with the volume of testing that was needed, and it took until May to get it. Sir Patrick Vallance has said to the Science and Technology Select Committee this afternoon that we don't currently have the testing capacity needed for the coming winter. So will the Secretary of State guarantee that it will be available long before then, and that we don't repeat one of the principal mistakes of the current pandemic?
I was heavily and personally involved in making sure that there was that rapid increase in testing capacity back then, and I'm absolutely determined to ensure that the testing that we need for this winter is available. We have plans in place to deliver it. Of course, that needs to be built. It isn't there now, but it will be built. Even if there are no breakthroughs on testing technology, which will make testing much easier to access, even if there are no breakthroughs, we have plans to ensure that the testing capacity that's necessary for winter will be available by winter.
Andrew Gwynn.
Thank you, and can I thank the Secretary of State for his statement. We know there are distinct areas of the country seeing local rises in cases, so can he explain what urgent steps the government are taking to increase testing in these areas? And with indulgence, as someone who's on week 17 of long COVID viral fatigue, can I also ask the Secretary of State what additional resources he's committing to NHS support services for those who are bluntly struggling to recover from the virus?
Deputy Speaker, I'm very sorry to hear that the Honourable Gentleman is suffering from post-viral fatigue. It is a very significant problem for a minority of people who had coronavirus, and my heart goes out to him because I know how debilitating it can be. I'm glad to say that we have brought in an NHS service, and I'll make sure that he has access to that service, as should anybody who's suffering from the symptoms of the fatigue that comes to some. And also I put just under £10 million into research to make sure that we get the best possible treatment. It's an area that's very close to my heart.
Angus Brendan McNeill.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker Tapalev. At his statement on July the 7th, the Secretary of State agreed with me that 80% of positive cases are asymptomatic, and he would use capability for testing of asymptomatics. Now, unless we patrol for the virus today, it is Leicester, but tomorrow it will be somewhere else. And one serious gap for many communities are workers returning from, as merchant mariners or oil rig workers. People are mostly routinely tested going on to oil rigs, but routinely are not tested coming off oil rigs. And I know of some oil rig workers who have tested positive, having taken tests for various reasons when they've come off. Now, I wonder if he will commit that returning mariners, and especially those coming off oil rigs, are tested, because we know that there's a danger and a gap we've got left open that unchecked people may be unwitting asymptomatic coronavirus carriers. And can you do something to close this gap, please?
To look into that, we have a number of surveys to find out where are the highest risk groups by occupation, and to put in place asymptomatic testing to address that risk. Of course, many oil rig workers come ashore in Scotland. The UK testing capability is significant on the west coast of Scotland, in Inverness, in Aberdeen, and elsewhere. And I'd be very happy to work with my counterparts in the Scottish Government to test the hypothesis that he proposes.
Felicity Buchan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Will my right honourable friend update the House as to the steps Public Health England is taking to ensure that we are ready in the winter time if there is a second spike?
Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend is quite right to ask about this, but it's not just Public Health England, it's right across the board taking steps in the NHS, taking steps in test and trace, to grow capacity and contact tracing and the testing that our right honourable friend just asked about, making sure that, for instance, we need to know that the capacity is there right across the board. And Public Health England have their responsibilities, but so do we all.
Ilya.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'm delighted that the Secretary of State for Health is so keen on data. My local CCG tells me that they're still not getting the right data to GPs. It's quite clunky, and they think, and they're right, I think, in saying that GPs can see comorbidities, so it's particularly important they get data about people who've been tested. And we have an outbreak in the north of my borough now, and we don't yet have the full postcode data. So we have the postcode data rather, but not the full address. This is isolated to households, and it will stop local lockdown if we can actually help get that very, very precise location. Surely the track and tracers are getting that data. Can they get that to local authorities so we can handle this locally?
I will personally ensure that all of the data that we have on her borough is made available to her borough, subject to a data sharing agreement, which I think is in place with Hackney, so that they can best address this. It may be that we don't have data that is being sought, in which case we can. It will be straightforward and open about that, and also we might want to have a discussion about whether we can get any further data that's necessary.
Andrew Bridgen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I commend the Secretary of State, the Department of Health and the people of Leicester for their heroic efforts to suppress the virus in the city and prevent widespread further infections across the country. However, can my right honourable friend comment on the levels of support and cooperation he believes these vital efforts have received from the Leicester Mayor Sir Peter Salisbury and from the Labour-controlled City Council?
Madam Deputy Speaker, we have been working very closely with the City Council. The officers of the City Council have been doing a heroic job. I just think that it's best if everybody pulls together and everybody tries to come together to tackle the virus. Given that we've involved local leaders in all of the critical decisions, indeed, I think it's best if people just try to stay on the same page as much as is possible, no matter how hard some people seem to find that.
Christine Jardine.
Very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Secretary of State, two of the recurring themes today from your statement have been people asking that we...
Order, even at this late moment. Would the Honourable Lady please address the Chair, not the Secretary of State? Please.
I do apologise, Madam Deputy Speaker. Would it be possible, as we look at the lessons that we learn from the first wave of this and the threat of a second wave, and the fact that the British public have been so keen to thank those working on the front line, we've talked earlier about the clapping for the NHS, would the Secretary of State consider using his influence with the Home Secretary to offer those migrants working in health and social care in this country the right to remain indefinitely?
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, absolutely, we enormously value all those who work in health and social care. And just this week, I was able to say that the exemption from the immigration health surcharge has extended right across those who work in health and social care. And I think this demonstrates the value that we place on them.
Finally, Robin Miller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My sympathies are with the people of Leicester. In North Wales, we continue to experience the low levels of infection that characterise a flat-topped curve while containing local workforce outbreaks. And I put my thanks on record for the care workers and staff at Betsy Cadwallader Health Board for tackling the different challenges this kind of outbreak presents. History teaches us great tragedies present opportunities for innovation. The Great Fire of 1666 gives us the origins of our fire service and modern insurance. Can my right honourable friend give us any hope that any advances will come from this tragic pandemic?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I am a man who is an unashamed optimist, and it's difficult sometimes to be an optimist in the middle of a global pandemic. But I'm glad for the chance to answer my honourable friend's wise question with some enthusiasm, because we have, amidst this great tragedy of this pandemic, seen some big steps forward. The use of telemedicine and improved access to medicine for so many people by use of technology is one example. The advance and the march of British science, which has led the world in terms of the development of the discovery of the first drug known to reduce the impact of coronavirus, but also across the board in terms of the scientific work that's gone on. I talked earlier about the flexibility and the system working in the NHS, which have got to be the hallmark of the future of our NHS. There's just three examples off the top of my head, but there are myriad others. And amidst this dark cloud, Madam Deputy Speaker, when we see a shard of light, we must take great hope from it.
Yeah. Thank you.
I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. First of all, I can say what a pleasure it is to have you in the chair on a subject matter that I know that you have great interest in, Deputy and Madam Speaker. I'm also very pleased to have an adjournment debate. I usually intervene in adjournment debates, but on this occasion I've actually got the adjournment debate, so I'm very, very pleased to have that. I want to put on record my thanks to Mr. Speaker for making it possible. I know this due to his forbearance and interest in this matter, and when I spoke to him about it some week or 10 days ago, he was obviously quite intrigued as well to see what was going on, and also wanted to ensure that this House had a chance to hear the story, and obviously we're very pleased to see the Minister in his place. The Minister and I have been friends, given this House at the same time. We've been friends, we've done our Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme together and many others, and I'm very, very pleased to see him in his place and look forward to his response. I'm also very thankful, Madam Deputy Speaker, to be privileged and also an honour to be the MP for Strangford, which boasts much rich heritage and history, with Grey Abbey being noted as the best example of Anglo-Norman Cistercian architecture in Ulster, founded in 1183 by the Africa, the wife of John de Courcy, the Anglo-Norman invader of East Ulster. Poor and decayed in the late Middle Ages, the abbey was dissolved in 1541, but in the early 17th century was granted to Sir Hugh Montgomery, and the nave was refurbished with parish worship until the late 18th century. The south edge, east edge of Newtonards, where these substantial remains of a Dominican friary founded in 1244 may be viewed. They are the only ones of their type in Northern Ireland. Built by the Savage family, the buildings were destroyed by Sir Brian O'Neill to prevent English soldiers using them. Sir Hugh Montgomery restored the church in 1607 at a small chapel, but it fell into disrepair in the middle of the 18th century. We also are blessed to host the St Patrick's Trail in memory of the legacy of St Patrick, the British missionary to Ireland, and as many of the abbeys that were erected as his legacy exist only as ruins and relics. You may wonder why I'm bringing up the history of these churches, but the reason is clear. Although they were designed as houses of worship, they are now wonderfully rich pieces of history, having lost their true purpose. And it would make my heart ache to see world-renowned St Margaret's, the church here, the parish church of Westminster, become another wonderfully rich old building that is not fulfilling its true design as a house of prayer and worship. It's also our church, Madam Deputy Speaker, as our discussion had the other night, and very clear that it's the church for the MPs and the peers as well. Absolutely gutted to receive notification last week that services were to be halted at St Margaret's. And as the time has passed, I say that I'm not the only one to feel this way. And I thank every person who has signed the online petition, with over 1,300 people asking us to be able to make a way forward to enable this church to be a tourist attraction as well. Because if we look at the background, it clearly is a part of the ceremony of this place, of the House of Commons and the House of Lords, but also to do what it was built for, to be a place for seekers of Christ to meet and worship Him. This is what the congregation are asking for, and that is what I am asking in this place, and looking longingly and beseechingly to the Minister for that purpose, that we facilitate them as best as we can in ensuring that the costs of these churches, which are tourism attractions but also places of worship, can remain open. I think of St Mark's Church in Newtonards in my main town. That beautiful historic building is a real central hub in the town, with children's work for disabled people, women's institute, men's group, and a thriving community hub whose primary aim remains to glorify God. This is what we need to see in churches throughout this land, and the fact is that something completely out of our control, COVID-19, has put some of these things in jeopardy. It means that we need to step in and step up, as we have done in almost all facets of life affected by the coronavirus pandemic. And I thank government, and put it on record, my eternal thanks and long-lasting thanks to them for all that they have done. I'm very pleased to see the Honourable Gentleman for Ipswich in his place, and I know that he wants to have a couple of minutes to make a contribution. If the Minister is happy with that, I'm very happy to let that happen. Is some pressing matters that are similar to what I'm asking for, but for his own constituency of Ipswich. Church tourism is a massive income generator throughout the UK. If we consider that 4 World Heritage Sites in the UK specifically include church buildings, Durham Cathedral, Westminster Abbey, Canterbury Cathedral and Fountains Abbey. Of the 16,000 Church of England church buildings, 4,200 are listed Grade 1, representing 45% of all secular or religious buildings listed at this grade, and a further 8,000 are listed Grade 2. There are 340 listed buildings of national importance in the care of the Churches Conservation Trust, and other listed faith buildings include 622 Roman Catholic churches, 537 Methodist, 306 Baptist churches, 69 congregational, 28 synagogues and 1 mosque. So the multitude and the magnitude of what we're asking for and those that are implicated in this is great. A further 146 ecclesiastical sites are in the care of English Heritage or the National Trust. Statistics for English tourism reveal that 55% of all day trips include at least one visit to a cathedral or a church, the third most visited of all types of attractions. So church tourism is phenomenal and one of the largest attractions. Our own Westminster Abbey, which incorporates St Margaret's here just to our left here and outside the House of Commons, has an enormous amount of visitors each year, creates a revenue which sustains Westminster Abbey and sustains St Margaret's. So what we do need, I believe, is some help and assistance. The amount of revenue that is created through the visitors to Westminster Abbey and St Margaret's is somewhere in the region of a loss, which it could be of £9 to £12 million. It's enormous. And I know that I did speak to the Secretary of State about this. I always feel a bit guilty, Madam Deputy Speaker, when you sort of say at tea time or at meals, and you go over and you say, "I'm sorry to bother you, but could I ask you?" And you sort of nab the opportunities, and then you sort of say, "Hope he didn't maybe doing that." Well, he didn't, and I'm very pleased to see the Minister in his place to answer. The North West Faith Tourism Scoping Study estimated at 17 million visits to 45 cathedrals and 52 places of worship. It has been suggested, and this is incredible figures, it adds up to the church tourism, that each parish church typically receives around 700 to 4,000 visitors each year. I want to also refer to that tourism absolutely provides revenue to keep these wonderful churches, which we need regular work carried out, and may have smaller congregations open and working. We understand that the congregations in churches and across the whole of the United Kingdom, Great Britain and Northern Ireland are decreasing, and not just because of COVID-19, but COVID-19 exacerbated that. It took away the revenue streams that they have. I mean, I was reading in one of the papers there one day that one of the churches, Church of England churches here, said he had about 150 people in his congregation, and when he went on to virtual, he had 25,000 people who watched. So there are other ways of doing churches, but speaking personally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I love going to church. I probably always have. Or nearly all my life. I went because my dad made me go when I was a wee boy, but I now go because I want to go. And I believe it's important to have the fellowship, to have the communion, to have the chance to pray, to worship, and do that in fellowship with other people. I'm very much a people person, always have been. I find Zoom incredibly hard to get used to. I find virtual Parliament extremely difficult, but I love coming here and intermingling with people, and that's important. The issue to me was highlighted by members of St Margaret's Parish Church who are desperate to find a way through and retain their home parish church. I believe there's a way to retain weekly worship, and I believe this place, this house, this minister can facilitate that. There's been a church on the site of St Margaret's next to Westminster Abbey since the 12th century. In 1614 it became the parish church of the Palace of Westminster. There's a regular congregation of between 70 and 120, and more than 250 on the community roll. We in this church, this house, when I first come here in 2010, I was made aware that there was a Holy Communion once a month in St Margaret's. So that was my first attendance at the Church of England here in the mainland. But I looked so much forward to that, and we were fortunate to have an opportunity to do that, not in St Margaret's, but here in the house here just yesterday as well. And I know that many MPs and peers look forward to that encouragement that we get on a Wednesday morning over a service, a Holy Communion, and then ultimately, until we can't have it at the minute because Mr Speaker's premises and house are being renovated, but when we do, we usually go there for breakfast, and it's always part of the occasion, part of the fellowship, part of who we are. Services at the church are spiritually uplifting and beautifully led by the priest vicars, and the choral music is absolutely exceptional. One of the things I've loved has been the choral services which St Margaret's holds for this house, for the House of Lords, for the House of Commons. We're very blessed in this house to have some wonderful singers. Madam Deputy Speaker, some of our right honourable and honourable members have the most wonderful voices. I'm sorry, I just can't, I know their names, but I can't remember their constituencies, so I'm not going to say it. I know that's not appropriate. But I've witnessed some of their contributions in St Margaret's, and they truly are uplifting. The congregation is made of an unusual mixture of local residents, employees at the Palace of Westminster, staff at Westminster School, members of Parliament, parents of boy choristers, enthusiasts for top-class choral music, and many other congregants, some of whom come halfway across London on a Sunday to worship in St Margaret's. Not a week passes without a visit from a former chorister or someone who was married at St Margaret's or who remembers it from their time working in London. And I'm sure, Madam Deputy Speaker, you personally, I'm using that in the right term, and us here can understand, because we meet people who have attended St Margaret's, who worship at St Margaret's, and they always say it's a wonderful occasion. Tourists are not usually part of the congregation, although they are welcome, but prefer to go to the Abbey instead. Sometimes the queues to get into the Abbey do not lend themselves to visitors being able to worship there. There absolutely is an acknowledgement that worship will change as every church throughout the land, and I understand that. But I honestly feel that aid from a specific churches fund will enable the church to deal with the deficit caused by coronavirus, and indeed perhaps new forms of income could be considered for during the week, such as conferences or exhibitions during the week, as long as Sunday worship was preserved. So the importance of Sunday worship is critical for the churches to survive, and if financial assistance through the Culture, Arts and Heritage 1.4 billion that government announced the week before last, if that was able in some way to help churches, whatever that way may be, it might be, Madam Deputy Speaker, through the choral groups or through the choristers. There's a way of doing it, but it's very important that we maintain St Margaret's here if we can. I believe as a body that uses a church when the need arises, and we do in this house, both houses, here and the other place, and that we play our part, not simply for this house, not simply to secure that place. However, there are also other historic churches who are able to stay open due to the tourism income that are struggling, and I do believe we have a duty to protect them as well. So it's not only about St Margaret's, it's not only about Westminster Abbey, which are very important to us here in this place, but it's also about other churches, and the honourable gentleman from Ipswich will refer to his contribution in a short time. I must be remembered, before this time these churches were viable, and the congregations were larger. They simply need support at this time and not in the long term. If we get back to normal, if we get back to pre-COVID-19, and we can move towards normality. I have no idea, Madam Deputy Speaker, what normality is. I don't think any of us do. But we hope at some stage we will get back to normality, and we can resume the services in the church we've had. We can resume the tourism and all the many different people and accents and voices and languages you hear whenever you walk outside of this place. So I looked at the CMS, who have striven to secure our arts venues. I very much look forward to the Minister's response, and rightly so, and ask that the historic churches, and on this occasion, our very own, as you and I have spoken, Madam Deputy Speaker, our very own St Margaret's receives the help that is needed to see her through this troublesome time. In this time of fear and despair, and with the mental health impact of lockdown and bereavement being very real, it's very real to me personally, and I believe, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's probably real to every one of us who represents our areas and knows our people and knows the losses that there's been. I've had two good friends who have died during the coronavirus, unable to attend both of their funerals, unable to pay my respects personally to the family because of we were adhering to the 10 people at a funeral. We hope to celebrate their lives at some later stage, and I believe we will whenever we get back to normality, but that's not just there just yet. So that bereavement is really real to us all. It is clear that the church has a vital role, and the church has, and our relationship with the Lord Jesus and our God we have a role to play with that as central community hubs. People want to seek God and His guidance and His comfort, and to attend church Sunday services with prayer and worship that are a key component of this need. And we must, I believe, facilitate that and not see more churches falling or failing due to something out of their control, COVID-19. So, Minister, look to you for the help that what can be done, what will be done to secure not simply historic buildings, but vibrant and spiritually fulfilling church worship. Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you so much for giving me the chance and the privilege to ask us in this House. Thank you.
Minister, Mr. Nigel Huddleston.
I believe.
I beg your pardon. Tom Hunt.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I also want to thank the Honourable Member for Strangford for securing this important debate on the effect of COVID-19 on our historic churches. And I completely appreciate how the closure of churches used as places of worship have been an incredibly difficult time for many people of faith. Ipswich has 12 medieval churches and 6 are still used as places of worship. But I want to use this opportunity to briefly touch on some of the other 6 which are now used to provide important community services. Churches such as St Mary on the Quay near the waterfront in Ipswich. After a bomb skidded into the Chancery in 1942, the church went unused for 30 years and was eventually vested in the hands of a redundant church's trust. With its fixtures and fittings moved to other churches, it was a shell of its former self. But it had a renaissance in 2008, Madam Deputy Speaker, when funding was used to restore the church and give it a new life as a key place wellbeing centre run by a local mental health charity, Suffolk Mind. Unfortunately, though, Suffolk Mind had to take the decision last month not to reopen Key Place after lockdown, partly because of a loss of income caused by COVID-19. Key Place has been an important feature in our town since 2016, supporting many local residents, and it won't really feel like going back to normal without it there. I just finally talk also about the financial pressures caused by COVID-19 touching St Stephen's Church in our town centre, with the Borough Council announcing that the Tourist Information Centre located there won't reopen after lockdown. Even in the age of the smartphone, the centre was holding its own, selling theatre and coach tickets and advising tourists about Ipswich's many attractions. And it's a loss that this important way of our town welcomes visitors won't reopen. Like St Mary of the Quay, St Stephen's Church faced a crumbling fate before its restoration in 1994. And the recent history of our local churches is a reminder that they have been through difficult patches before. But it's now up to us to not let them fall into obscurity again and find new uses for them so they continue to be at the heart of our community as we recover from COVID-19. Madam Deputy Speaker, all of our churches in Ipswich are invaluable, whether they are used for worship or places of community. And they are fundamental parts of our town's heritage and Ipswich's story. We must not let the chapter of COVID-19 represent in that story mean that our great churches are allowed to gather dust and risk them not being there for future generations to benefit from them. So I agree with the Honourable Member for Strangford. Whether places of worship or places of community, particularly in Ipswich, which we know is the oldest town in the country, as much as Colchester might like to dispute that, we know how important our wonderful medieval churches are, so I'd urge the Minister to provide support, if necessary, to ensure that we can keep those icons and those bastions of what is so important about our town.
And now we have the Minister, Nigel Huddleston.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Firstly, my sincere thanks to the Honourable Member, the Member for Strangford, who is indeed a very good friend, for introducing this debate today on this very important issue. As always, he spoke with great eloquence and knowledge about this matter, and I think his passion for the church and churches came through very clearly, and that passion we all know is shared by very many of our constituents right across the country. I'd also like to thank the Honourable Member for Ipswich for his